All right. Again, a warm welcome. I'm going to kick us off today. I'm Brandy Gilbert from Community Science, and you've just joined Bringing Youth Voices to the Forefront, using research to inform responsive practice and policies. Again, welcome. We're so glad that you could join today. We were super excited to see lots of interest in this topic for all of us here today on the panel. This is definitely a topic that's been driving our work, so super excited to talk about it today. Can I have the next slide, please, Ante? A little bit about what we're up to today is we shared in the outreach to our webinar that lots of people talk about research to practice and research to policy, but there really are some nuts and bolts in getting that right so that you're doing work that can inform policy and practice. And we're going to be sharing some lessons learned, including what I know for our team, there were challenges, but we did make lots of wins in the end, and just sharing how some of you might be able to use those lessons learned in your own work. And as we get going, also a warm welcome from our company, Community Science. I like to say that our name is in what we do. We use science, data, and information to come alongside communities to help build things that they want to be stronger, and kind of keep what's strong going that way, and strengthen what they might want to see differently, in particular for young people as well. So we do research, strategy work, technical assistance, and lots of evaluation as well to do that. And again, I'm Brandy Gilbert, joining you from Community Science, Senior Associate here, also the lead of the Youth Engagement and Youth Leadership Practice Area. And I'd like to say that when our panelists join, to ask them to share a bit about their work, 30 seconds or so, and also to share something that they're excited about. So something that I'm excited about is really today. Today is a long time in the making for us to share our research focused on the voices of young people who experience disconnection from school and work in Connecticut. And I feel very proud to continue to elevate those voices to inform practice and policy today. Devontae, I'll pass to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Devontae Haynes. I am a managing associate here at Community Science in the Youth Leadership Practice area with Brandy. And I'm also an assistant professor in social work at Temple University. And I'm just excited to, one, be here today, but then also really to support others and uplift communities that are working to do youth engagement work and support youth. And I will pass it to Dr. Rennekamp.
Hi, everybody. I'm Roger Rennekamp, and I am here in Lexington, Kentucky, just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. And I've spent my entire career in higher education, primarily at three different land-grant universities: the University of Kentucky, Oregon State University, and Ohio State University. And my work is focused primarily on the outreach and engagement portfolios that those universities do through their cooperative extension arms of the university. What I'm excited about is the growing interest in making sure that the voices of young people and their actions play a role in solving some of the wicked issues facing our country.
Definitely. Thank you. Dr. Childs?
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Joshua Childs. I'm an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin in our College of Education, where my research focuses on collaborations and cross-sector partnerships, and really trying to understand how different people and organizations are involved in trying to improve and support educational practices and outcomes. So my work is in areas such as school attendance or chronic absenteeism, computer science education, intercollegiate and interscholastic athletics, and a wide range of other things. And I'm super excited about some work that I've been engaged in that's been focusing on high school student athletes' perceptions of their coaches and coaches' perceptions on their student athletes, and the ways in which we can think about coaches not just serving as an athletic coach, but also in the role of educator, community leader, and so forth. So super excited and glad to be here.
Thank you. Thanks again to Drs. Haynes, Rennekamp, and Childs for being here. And also lots of thanks to our research team who informed this work and our funding partners, which was Dalio Education Foundation and Connecticut Opportunity Project, who have really pulled this body of work together and funded to support and drive research that helps to inform practice and policy, as well as many nonprofit partners that have also helped to do the recruitment and really work one-on-one with young people and seeing this work be fulfilled. Next slide, please. So getting into the nitty-gritty today, we like to start our webinars with a big question. So our big question today is, how do you ensure your research is ready to inform policy and transform practice? And for us, we really began with the end in mind. We're an ambitious group, and we also worked with an ambitious team. So working with Dalio Education's, the Connecticut Opportunity Project, short for CTOP, working with CTOP, including our program officer, Samantha Miller, and her team, were really at the beginning saying, like, we want to use this work to drive big things. And because we were asking the hard questions about our study in particular, focused on the voices of young people who were experiencing disconnection from school and work, ages 14 to 26. So for us, that was the big, hairy problem that we were tackling. I think, Roger, you mentioned like those big, hairy things. It was a big one. And the data showed it wasn't only our study, but there was also a quantitative study from Boston Consulting Group, and there was also a best practice study from MDRC. And so together, this work collectively was able to help drive practice and policy. But the numbers really showed that 1 in 5 young people throughout Connecticut in that age group were experiencing that disconnection. And that was about 119,000 young people in the state. So it was a massive problem. And a lot of the discussion in the state was really on the issues of school funding, school age, but what happens when you come out of that school system, when you might fall out of that school system. So we're really beginning with the end in mind, and that we want to change that for young people. We want to also bring attention to the issues that are happening, not only in the school building, but really surrounding it. So we have just this one slide to talk about how we began with the end in mind and what happened in the end, and then we're gonna backtrack it. So what happened in the end is that there was a passage of a bill focused on young people. That was Bill 5213, which had many components in it for young people, for funding, also for transportation, for data collection. For data collection that help to stream various sources of data together for young people to really have better services. And so that was the bill that was passed. We also had policy commission that the foundation was really working to bring together. That was a combination of nonprofit leaders, as well as Dalio Education and the CTOP team, and many municipality leaders, mostly mayors. So really thinking about, once a research study comes out, who are the people who are going to inform what happens with it, who does what with the findings, just knowing that there was that body that was ready to wait for the findings across all of the studies and use them in their cities to inform what happens next as far as practice policy at both the local, well, really the local, state, and the regional level. Then from there, with 119K commission, there was also taking of all those research studies and putting them into a comprehensive plan. So using the combination of the qualitative data with young people's voices, the best practice, and the cold, hard numbers of how prevalent the issue was to come up with a plan that had major stakeholders already buying into it. And then lastly, we would say the biggest win of all of this was highlighting the voices of young people, because we knew that you couldn't have a plan like this without the firsthand experiences of those who are affected by the issues. So we'll talk a little bit about where those young people's voices came from and how that elevation happened. But we see these across the board as major, what we would call wins that came from this work. And in terms of talking about a framework of how we use this information to get to that place where we were seeing things happen because of the research studies, we have this framework, which is first to engage, then to amplify, then address needs, and then to guide. So we'll talk about a little bit about what each of these boxes mean and how we did each of these things. And then after that, we're gonna pass you on to our panel so they could talk a little bit about, or kind of across these boxes, what does it look like to do this work? So first is to engage. And in this case, we talk about how we started off, again, beginning with the end in mind, by engaging the voices of the young people who have lived experience. And so in Connecticut, one of the very mindful and really purposeful things that we did was having a community advisory group that was intergenerational. And so thinking about how did the study was it informed? The recruitment also went through this community advisor group. How do we approach recruitment? How did we do warm handoffs for young people in the study? Where did we do those handoffs to? How were the data used and presented? So we had this group which we could constantly take back to from the beginning to the end of 13 members, a combination of both younger people and professionals, some mixed gender, and also we had a range of ages. So we wanted to have both 9 young people, so we want to have more young people than the other part was like the professional voices or older adults. Some young people, of course, were considered adults, but still on the younger side of that 14 to 32 age range. And all of those young people did have experiences with disconnection from school and work. There were really a range of experiences. And then we also had professional members of our group who were mostly representing youth-serving organizations. So we had this good combination of a group that we could consistently bring information back and get feedback and make sure that we're being useful even in the beginning. And next, we want to talk a little bit about whose voices we amplified. So we see in all research that focuses on bringing, informing practice and policy, that it's key to think about whose voices are we elevating and whose name are we doing this work. So in this case, we're doing this work in the names of young people, 14 to 26, in the state of Connecticut who had experienced disconnection or were actively experiencing disconnection at the time that the data were collected last year. And so we talk with them a lot about their experiences and these kind of major components. So what is their day-to-day like? What is their history in particular, like with certain systems that we know young people interact with. So that includes education system, housing, child welfare, the health system as well, and the housing system. And then lastly, we talk with young people about their hopes and goals. Our team has a thread really of hope that regardless of what vulnerabilities young people might experience, that there's also the hopefulness too. And all of these young people also shared their hopes and dreams with us for what's next for them. Next, please. And before I pass it on to Devontae, just a little bit more about whose voices we were amplifying. So I won't break down everything for you, but you can just see a little bit about, in the case of our study, who were we talking with and kind of the diversity of the voices that we were talking with. And one interesting piece is that lots of young people in our sample had connection with the criminal justice system when you think about the systems that young people are interacting with. So there's education. Most of us are based in school. We're legally having to go there, but then you can also see for these other systems where the highest interactions were. And our study really focused on understanding how these systems are intersecting. And therefore, when that happens, how young people are supported or not supported. Therefore, from there, kind of taking that to, well, how can we then drive practice and policy that makes us be more on the supportive side rather than those systems that are making it more challenging for young people and their families to survive and thrive. Dr. Haynes, I'll pass to you.
All right, thank you. So Brandy talked a little bit about how we engaged the youth in this research study, and then how we also took that information that we learned from them and with them to really amplify their voices. And so the next step of this was really making sure that we were addressing some of these key challenges that we learned from the youth throughout this research project. And so we really want to make sure that the recommendations that we were putting forward were actionable items, things that legislators or funders or different organizations and community leaders can actually take these recommendations and actually create some impactful policies or programs that can actually influence the lives and experiences of these young folks. And so 3 things that we wanted to talk about that really stood out in this study, among a long list of other things, which we'll show you the link later. But that was really housing instability, trauma that our older youth groups were experiencing, and then this idea of mental health versus holistic health. And so what we really started to realize when we were looking at the housing instability is that housing really emerged as one of the primary barriers that the youth were experiencing due to limited access to education, employment, and other things. And so we tried to prioritize policies that really supported creating affordable housing and creating rental assistance programs to support the youth in those particular areas. When we looked at older youth and trauma, older youth, we started to realize they really sustained impacts of trauma that lasted long term. They faced challenges that required more targeted mental health supports, especially for youth as they were aging out of different systems. And so really looking at how we are supporting the youth beyond the age of 18 and still getting them those support services. So again, we focused on including more trauma-informed care, mental health service opportunities that were specifically targeted for older youth who were over the age of 18, and particularly those in their late 20s. And then when we were looking at this mental health versus holistic healthcare, what we noticed is when we asked the youth about healthcare, all of them, they instantly went to mental health. They talked about having a therapist, knowing how to find a therapist, but they rarely talked about those other primary care, having a primary care doctor, going to the dentist, and some of those different things. And so we really promoted ideas and policies and programs that could really integrate the healthcare model for youth and balance between mental health, physical health, and their overall social well-being to make sure that we're supporting them, fully wraparound support services all around them. Next slide, please. So the next part of this, after we created that framework, was to guide. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were guiding practitioners and policymakers to the appropriate places that the youth identify as some of their needs. And so on the screen, you can see out of those three categories, some of the recommendations and policies, recommendations that we came up with for the policymakers and practitioners as it revolves around expanding the availability of affordable housing options within Connecticut due to some zoning laws that they currently have in place. And so really looking at how some of those can be changed to help support housing insecurity and instability for youth. Really shifting from more of a punishment to a rehabilitation focus when we're looking at trauma-informed care for youth. And then expanding access to affordable healthcare coverage for youth and young people, even after the age of 18, to make sure that we can still get them connected to these support services that they really need to support themselves. And so by having all of these things come together, it allowed us to help policymakers and practitioners to, one, have targeted and research-based strategies and recommendations that they can use to then address this youth disconnection. And so as Brandy talked about in the first slide, you saw some of those things being used with the passage of the House Bill 55213. You can see it in the Bold New Plan recommendations that came out from the 119K Commission. And so that was a really big piece for what we were trying to do, is like, how do we guide the policymakers and practitioners to these key points and key moments instead of trying to leave it vague and letting them figure it out. So that was a big piece for us. Next slide, please. So now we want to use the rest of our time to actually open it up to our panelists to talk about how they are doing this work, in their worlds, in their communities, how you all can do this in your world, in your communities, and then some tips that they have used and they have utilized to really make this go. So we have 4 questions that we're going to go through with our panelists. The Q&A box is also open. Brandy will be monitoring that. So feel free to pop in some questions if you have questions in addition to the ones that we're going to go through, or if you would like the panelists to expand upon any of their responses, you can feel free to also use the question and answer box for that. So our first question for our panelists is, focusing on your work, how do you use research to inform policies and programs that uplift youth voice?
I think Josh and I are both sitting here very politely waiting for the other one to start, so I'll jump in there. In my introduction, I also didn't mention that I describe myself as a recovering program evaluator. So, Brandy, I really appreciate the notion of beginning with the end in mind. And, there's a lot of valuable outcomes that arise from this work. And I guess in my work over the years, I've tended to look at it, how it advances the growth and development of the young people themselves through their process of engagement. For much of my career, I've been affiliated with a national youth organization called 4-H. And I think a lot of you are familiar with 4-H, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. But over the last decade, 4-H has developed and refined a model of positive youth development that focuses on youth thriving. And the model includes 7 indicators of thriving. And I don't expect you to remember these. I don't expect you to write them down. But I'm going to go through these. And I want you to think as I go through these is that how, in fact, can youth voice and youth action work contribute to these outcomes. And the first, or these indicators, the first one is that young people have a hopeful purpose. That is, they believe in a hopeful future and a purpose in life. The second one is challenge and discovery, and that refers to a desire and willingness to try new challenges. A growth mindset that emphasizes learning over innate ability, pro-social values of respect, honesty, responsibility, empathy, and helping, positive emotionality, or the ability to express and manage their emotions appropriately, goal management, setting and managing goals, and perseverance towards toward goal achievement. And then the last one is transcendent awareness. That means connecting to something greater than self that provides meaning and purpose in life and shapes everyday thoughts and actions. And as I think about all the different types of work that I've done, I'm hard pressed to identify any activity that we might offer to young people that contributes more to building these thriving characteristics and engagement in community-based participatory research and the actions that it informs. So while there's many benefits that come from it, I really think about it from the lens of how, in fact, do we help young people grow and develop in positive ways toward a positive adulthood.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think I depends on like how we think about our or how we define policies and programs, whether we're talking like big P policy in terms of maybe at a federal or state level, or big P kind of program that's something that's going to have impact on thousands or millions of young folks. And for me, I think I like, or we're talking about little P, right? Like we're thinking about in the classroom or a school setting or within one particular specific community. And I think one thing that's evident that I teach in my courses here at UT Austin is, we like how central do we as researchers, as emerging graduate students that are about to enter the field in different types of fields, really think about or put value on youth voice in terms of designing policy and practice or in programs, excuse me. And so what do I mean by that? I'm thinking that we're about to have a state legislature session that begins in January. And the number of young folks that will be up at the Capitol to advocate or be able to discuss important policies that will impact their daily lives is very minimal. Or there's certain like youth advocacy days where you'll see all these young folks running around in different colored t-shirts, going from a legislative office to another, mostly talking with aides, right, to try to advocate for the position. And so I think it's important that we discuss and really try to hone in on like how do we center youth voice and youth-centered research in our work, and how do we even leverage it to inform, again, policies and practices. So I think of the work that I've been doing around student athletes at the interscholastic being high school level, where they're really being able to have the chance to kind of assess their coaches, assess the value that their coaches have, not only to them as athletes or student athletes, but also to them in terms of things that happen off the field or the court, in the classroom or at home. And what I've seen and what we're starting to see that's being valued is that in a state like Texas, where to be able to coach at the middle or high school level, you have to be a full-time employee of that school district or that school. That we're seeing like the coaches serve in the variety of roles, and that they are not just those that blow a whistle or run plays, that a lot of them are math teachers, they're science teachers, they're paraprofessionals, they're special educators or educators. Some of them run school buildings, in particular our rural or smaller schools. And so these student athletes, what these young people say about their coaches matters and informs the type of policies or programs or type of professional development that's needed to ensure that coaches are at their best, that they are providing for students of their age that the highest kind of quality, not only of instruction or educator practice, but also what they do in the field. And so I think that's important, and how then we then kind of think about scaling that up or sustaining that kind of work is super important. But I don't know, at least from my lens, I don't think we do enough to really rely on youth voice in terms of informing policy. And I think it's super important because oftentimes, again, they're most impacted by the policies and usually have most limited voice in some of this type of work. So.
Perfect. Thank you both. So our second question really focuses on examples. And so can you each share a specific example of a successful collaboration between researchers and practitioners or community members and organizations that have led to both strengthening research outcomes and practical real-world impact? So what were the key things that made this collaboration successful? If you could provide some specific examples to those. And feel free to offer some challenges, because we know that also comes along with this.
Sure, Devontae. Yeah, I want to. I'm sorry, Josh. I was actually going to do a shout out to you, because I think one of the points that you made was so critical. There is that we don't always have to focus on the big P. We don't have to worry about all of our efforts. Don't always have to result in changes in state laws, federal laws, policy. We don't always have to focus there. Sometimes we can work at some of our most important work sometimes actually works at that hyper local level, and that kind of stuff. And I really appreciated you bringing that forward. But one of the examples that I'm going to share, I guess, is some stuff that I was connected with out in the state of Oregon, and that was the use of photo voice. Okay, and a lot of you are familiar with photo voice, where we use photographs, to really capture the nature of an issue in a particular community, and use that information that we collect in an actionable way, to address those community issues. So, and sometimes I think we use photo voice, where we actually put a GPS coordinate to the photo that was taken. We can generate, some geospatial maps of the distribution of an issue in the county, in a community. So in Oregon, we had young people that were doing several different things. We had one group of young people that was using photo voice, to map food deserts and food swamps, in their particular community. Another group of young people used photo voice to document illegal dumping of trash in the community. And then in Beaverton, Oregon, one of the coolest things that I saw was young people taking photographs and reporting personal stories of people who represented the diversity in the community, and had storefront windows with those photographs displayed, for a period of a month there in the community. And all those, I think they contribute to the knowledge base that we have about how we address that issue in the community. So photo voice was one example. Also, in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin, they've developed an effort called Youth Advocates for Community Health, that positions young people to lead community change related to social determinants of health. And they've developed a guidebook and online course that are available for individuals that want to learn more about how to lead those processes in communities. So I mentioned to Brandy, I'll share a link both to that thriving model of 4-H, and then also to Youth Advocates for Community Health. That might be some tools or resources people might be interested in. So those are a couple of examples. Didn't mean to cut you off there, Josh. Sorry.
No, all good. We both waited the last one, and then we both jumped in for this one. So I think the third one, we'll just talk at the same time. That'll probably what will happen for the third question. This is such an important question. And for those who know me, I'm a non-traditional academic. I'm wearing a hat. I teach a certain type of way, and I really view I really like to unpack and talk about the privilege of being a researcher, particularly at a Research One university. And I think what's important is that we as researchers, and hopefully this will help answer this question, aren't know-it-alls. We don't know it all. We don't know what's best. We have ideas. We have hunches. We have research questions. We have maybe depending on who you ask, sound methodology, the right framework. But it doesn't mean that we might or should we go into a partnership collaboration as the exports. I like to tell my students all the time that we don't ride on a white horse trying to save folks in community. That's not, we should be actually working in true partnership. And so what does that look like at times? At times that's really good. It's really fruitful. It can lead to really more rigorous questions or additional questions, great conversations. And then sometimes successful collaboration can be messy. It can be conflict. It can be different ways of viewing and seeing the world, which I think is super important. So the ones I'm thinking about are ones that we co-constructed the questions. We co-constructed the approach to really trying to solve a problem of practice or answer a question that was really burning for practitioners or community members. And co-constructed in a way that took in the experiences of those that were on the ground or in the trenches, if you want to call it, with those of us that sit in a lovely ivory tower like I am doing at the moment, right? To really help and to really try to think through what is it that we're trying to do for the best in the best interest of students. And I know in the best interest of kids or the best interest of students has a wide range of meanings for folks, but so that also was part of it, defining in terms of what we are trying to do and who we're trying to do it for. And so been working with this school district here in Texas around some school attendance issues that they're trying to solve. And what we ended up with is kind of also piggybacking off of what Roger just said, was really they had a huge population of their students at their high school that have been chronically absent. And they were charged by their school board to really try to bring that number down. And what we ended up getting towards is like, actually, it's going to be impossible to drive this number down with this many number of students. Let's focus on a select few. We ended up focusing on 10. And how do we build profiles of each of these students, both inside of the school, but also outside? So essentially what their daily life looks like, and then think about and iterate on all the possibilities of how adults interact with them. How does infrastructure and systems interact with these students? How do students interact with their peers and other adults? And then how from their voice, we didn't use photo voice, but we did some empathetic interviews and some observations, and then talking with folks that they were related to or from their community and then themselves. How do we then think of strategies or interventions that could help them to go to school more? Because what the assumption was these students just were choosing not to go to school, and they were making a deliberate choice not to attending. And by doing these profiles, we were able to see that it had nothing to do with their own choice, but all of these systemic issues that the school either wasn't aware of or they couldn't do it alone. And so this also help to create a student profile, but a larger community profile in which how do they engage with students who are at this point chronically absent with the school. And so I think, again, one was this co-construction of knowledge, co-construction of research questions, and then also this sort of like this back and forth, or I guess you would call it challenge of like, how do we have impact and how do we have the most impact or biggest impact? And big and most differ between the different stakeholders involved, where eventually we were able to kind of drill down to like, let's just focus on this 10. And then maybe the next iteration we can get bigger or larger. So hopefully that helps answer this question with a specific example and like ways in which we can think about these type of collaborations. And I think success can vary in a lot of ways. So thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to add there that our study was similar in thinking about not only profiles, but like what are the types of issues that young people are facing, and often they're systematic. And we also pointed to, like many other studies, that those issues are often starting young, and then they have such a long life cycle. So for us, our earliest people in our study were 14 years old, and our latest were 26. And it's like, oh, how are you hearing the same stories, right? Or that long-term trajectory that happens. And even some of the partners that we work with talked about having more of a focus a little bit earlier, like that 18 and under, but seeing even some of the participants in our study that they were serving, like how sustained those issues are even for older youth. Um, and then I also wanted to add about co-constructing that's definitely a key piece too. And one way that we also did that is not only co-constructing how we approach, but the findings too. So it made me think, Josh, when you were talking, we also worked with our community advisory group in the Capitol to share back findings through something that we call a data walk, which is kind of like a science fair of tables and snacks and things like that. But while legislators were in session, they were also able to drop into this room and hear voices from the posters, voices of young people who participated in the study, and then also in the room for community advisory group members who were also able to talk to the findings. So thinking about how you're sharing back so that people cannot actually relate to that too in the co-construction of like dissemination of findings really too.
I'll
And
also add, so I'll just also add very quickly too, timing. Timing was really important. So we didn't start this study and then say, oh man, we want to work with community. We knew going into this study that we wanted to work with and for the community. So we engaged them at the beginning of this entire study. They were our community partners were part of the entire part of the study, from helping us to recruit young folks to be part of the study to Brandy mentioned earlier, some of those pass offs, because some of the things that we were talking to the youth about in there, we wanted to make sure that we had relationships with community partners to make sure that youth had support after the research study was over, after we were leaving the community, to make sure that they were getting connected to those resources. So bringing in those community partners and organizations at the forefront, rather than trying to bring them in the middle or at the end, was also really important. And it also made it easier for us to work with them and really build that trust and relationship on both sides.
Yeah, but that timing was not easy. I mean, our partners at CTOP, including Samantha Mill and her colleagues, were really strong about like this research needs to come out while policymakers are in session and like it's this time. And so, how do you hold that with also like we really went all of us back and forth about being respectful to youth voices and how long it really took those interviews so that we could hold young people well. So, I mean, it was just so many pieces kind of like moving around at the same time.
Mhm.
Were you going to add
oh,
something else,
yeah, I was
TJ?
gonna. I saw. And apologies for calling you your first name. I saw Susan's question pop up about the embracing tension, and also how do you ensure it doesn't cause individuals to become closed off. And that's like, I don't have a magic answer for that one. I think everyone would, I think if we asked 10 of us on this, part of this webinar, I think you could probably get 10 different answers around that. But I think, one, I think it's just to name, right? So we name, I think we positioned ourselves or stated what our positionalities were from the beginning. I think, named what we were trying to address and solve, what was our purpose in that. Also recognizing that there will be tension. There's, again, what's in the best interest of kids means very different things, right? And then if it involves one of my four, that's totally different. That's the best interest for my four, and everyone else can follow after the fact, right? So being able to name and state that there will be, and I think it was, in the one project I was talking about, I think we've done these kind of constant checks to make sure that we're still uh, uh, on the same path towards what our ultimate goal was, and trying to study and understand and trying to really address. And I think that's given, at least from my view, along with this one project, folks space to sort of give voice to. We do have folks that we are responding to, which is a elected school board that's charged us with that will face turnover tomorrow. And so we've had to allow space for those folks that are funding, quote unquote, this thing to have their voices heard, but also recognizing and trying to maneuver around, or not maneuver around, but try to navigate the kind of political and sort of monetary sort of constraints or strings, I guess, attached with this project. So I think it's just being clear and open and communicative throughout the process is what I'd say. But I don't know if that fits every scenario on that, but at least with that one project, that's what's been taking place and happening.
Perfect. Thank you. So before we go to the next question, Brandy, I'm going to put you on the spot because I see a question in the chat and it goes along with kind of the next question. So I'm going to give Brandy a chance to respond to that one first, which is, how do you define youth?
Yes. And I mean, similar to some of the other things we talked about, I think we would all probably define it slightly different on this call. For us, we really think about like middle to late adolescence. Also, sometimes I say that we think about teens and young adults. Our general age range, like at community science in our practice area, is really like the 14 to 26. Sometimes they say 16 to 24. It really just depends. I like to say that to me, the threshold is young people who can speak from their own experiences. So I see like child-focused methods, sort of like drawing and all the other things you can do more for like the young ones is sort of like out of our spectrum. We're really with young people who can sort of voice where they are, what works for them in their community, what they want to see change. And where I've seen that biggest when I say youth is really getting into like the teens and young adults focus. And for us in our practice area, the other reason why we focus on that is because I also have a strong interest in adolescence because of how powerful the time of adolescence is. And we could never get into it all here, but thinking about brain development, agency, and all the things that happen in that age range really take a person through their life course. So trauma, resilience, all of that stuff is super important in that range. So that's my best take for the panelists. Also, if you have anything to add, feel free to hop in.
Perfect. Then we'll jump to question 3, which is centering youth voices. So in your work, how have you ensured that community voices, particularly those of youth, are integrated into the research process? So from design to dissemination, how has this influenced the outcomes and ensured that the research is addressing both the community and youth needs?
Go ahead, Josh. I'm going to be quiet right now.
Oh, I feel like I've talked a lot. Okay, I'll go. So yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I haven't always been able to do this, and I haven't always done this. Some for some reason. So why has that been the case? For some reason, it's the timing of needing something to be delivered. There's a deliverable. There's something that needs to be happening. Sometimes it's based upon who's partnering or working on that. And so I'll be vulnerable and be honest, like this always hasn't happened. Sometimes community voices or young people have been ignored, not part of it. And then you get a reviewer or on a webinar or a question, be like, so why didn't you include student voice or whatever else? And you give the typical academic answer. That's a really good point. Probably the next iteration of funding, we will include or should include that, right? And I think it goes to what I said earlier to the first question is a lot of times, a lot of our, at least in my work, or at least in the world I've lived in, a lot of the work or a lot of the framing doesn't take it to account students or young folks at the center or being an integral part of the thing, but just the people that are impacted by the thing, right? They're the outcomes or the policy, their intervention will impact them. Again, to the point that they have no say on what that thing looks like from the beginning to the end. So as a researcher, I'm aware of that. I try to be in tune of that. I'm not perfect at that, as I stated earlier. But also in areas or examples where that work has happened or it has been ensured, I think, again, it kind of goes to what I said earlier, right? Like from the jump, co-constructing, co-creating, paying, I think, right? So paying folks to be a part of that, right? I get the course buyouts and the summer salary, whatever else, but how do I pay the people who are going to be involved in research or the evaluation to also, pay them the way that they are also participating to contribute, I think is super important and is sometimes overlooked. And letting them know that I think also having them see that what they're putting into this work is not only contributing to the research findings, evaluation findings, the outcomes, but their own lived experience or reality, or the folks that they're working with or in community with, that is contributing to imagining what could be better, or what could be possible, right? And so I think that's important. I don't know if I fully answer that question, but I think for me, it was important to recognize the fact that I've not always been perfect in that. And I think we as researchers sometimes miss out on integrating the community, however we want to define community, within our work, and that we've got to do a better job at doing that. And part of that is on folks like me to train our upcoming PhD students, our graduate students, how to go about doing that work. And so being really conscious and deliberate on that, right? Because I wasn't trained on being community action oriented or community based in my program, PhD program. That's no slight against my program. But that wasn't central and that wasn't focus, right? It was about running stats and getting an outcome and making sure your p-value was right, all good, right? And yada, 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 which is important, but wasn't focused on this community aspect of it. So I think it's incumbent on me as a professor, someone who trains up and coming evaluators, researchers, academics, et cetera, how to go about engaging and doing that work and that process. And so learning the values of network improvement communities, learning the value of research practice partnerships and the potential that they have, learning equity-centered and equity-focused language, being okay to center things like race, gender, equality, sexuality, socioeconomic status in the work, and being able to talk about that and how to frame it, how to navigate it when it becomes political so that it becomes central. And then also finally, and I'll be quiet, how do we not come at or partner with community or youth or young people or families or caregivers from a deficit framing or a deficit perspective? And how do we go about doing it so that we can see assets and strength base in the work that we do and with the people we partner with?
Josh, wonderful, wonderful advice. I think that's exactly right. I'll share three words that I think are really important in centering youth voices. Is number one, it has to be authentic, it has to be meaningful, and the voice has to be comprehensive. And I don't just mean that for young people, but any engagement with community, because young people and community members, they can smell inauthenticity a mile away. Okay, so you can't cherry pick which parts of the research project you involve youth in particular. I've seen a lot of folks, a lot of researchers who only use young people in certain parts of the research process, like data collection or coding because it's cheap labor. That's not going to cut it. So I think, the notion of involving in the whole process from the beginning, for example, even formulation of the research questions, we as researchers may not even be asking the right questions. So young people, community members can help reframe the focus of the study. What methodology are you going to use? Is that, you can't necessarily come in with an a priori notion of we're going to do it this way. We're going to do a survey. And that kind of thing. There may be better ways to get the data we need. Also engagement in field testing, pilot testing, things for language, in data analysis, interpretation, and Brandy, you talked also about in communicating the results, interpreting those results, and making them make sense. Real quickly, I'll mention something, I guess, about the notion of who are the young people, and and what do we mean by youth, and I guess, Brandy, I'm going to reiterate, I think one of the things that I think you said, you may not use these words, but the whole thing about it being developmentally appropriate. I've done some of this work all the way down to middle school level, and that's because, what we know about the human development process is the development of kind of these if and then logic, and that kind of stuff, and abstract thinking doesn't really happen until like 12 or 13 years of age. and then continues all the way up on into young adulthood. So, we can really think about what we mean by involved is that young people can be either a leader of a part of this, they can be a partner in the part of it, or they can also be a learner. We don't expect the middle schoolers to do analysis of variance, but they may learn from the process and understand what that particular statistical method means. So the nature of the involvement can vary, number one, according to the age of the young people we're involving, but then number two, appropriateness for that particular stage of the research project, but making sure we're authentic, we're meaningful, and comprehensive, involving through the entire process.
Yeah, thank you. And to add to that, a shameless plug is that we're also taking this question up in our next webinar, which our colleague who's on here, Dontarius Cowens and Danielle Gilmore, will be leading to talk about our own community advisory group work and like, what does it really look like to do that? I really appreciate, Josh, how you started out and saying like, it's not always that way. In just transparency that you could have other perspectives. There's lots of studies about like providers and teachers and all of those things where young people are the outcome, but not the voices. And then the flip side of that is like, to me, the study that we're talking about, this is like my proudest study where we have done that. And I still have like, I myself have so many critiques of like, oh, we wish we could have done this and this to make these voices more powerful. Some of the things like, just the basic things we've done, like paying young people, doing capacity building, and also seeing that to be intentional, sometimes that does mean you're having to slow down. And that pushes against like everybody's wanting us like, hurry up, get the findings, which gets into, I'm going to introduce Devontae. One of our questions here is how do you get youth-informed research recommendations to the right hands? Policymakers at my state can be really hard to reach, even though they claim they want to hear from people in their community and local experts. And I would say that's related to this question before we close out in a couple of minutes is, we kind of talked about this earlier in the panel that it's timing. So thinking about what little p or big P policies are on the table, what are decision-making windows, how can you influence that? What goes to the table, what gets passed or what gets moved forward, and implementation, because sometimes like you can get a policy like this one that we talked about, but then like, what does it look like to make it real and like how it actually helps young people in implementation, which our colleagues at CTOP were then like moving to the next part, like how do we influence what it really looks like? So the young people actually say when we come back and talk to them later, like, hey, it feels different because this has happened. So I would say timing is key in that whole like begin with the end in mind of like where you're going to take this, how, and having those heavy hitters. So like what I really love about the 119K Commission is that it had municipality leaders on there and mayors. So you're already building a table where like you're taking it to mayors in cities that are seeing high numbers of young people experiencing disconnection from school and work. Other thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, Brandy, you want to share about too? Because I think a big part of that question too is policymakers in my state can be really hard to reach, even though they claim they want to hear this information. So you want to share how we actually took our data to the policymakers, where it was at the Capitol for them to get it?
Yes, you could talk. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, go.
So another thing that we did was we had what we called a data walk, and so once we had all of our findings, we actually presented our data at the state capitol while the legislators were in session. And so we had a room in the building where we invited legislators, we invited the community, and we invited the young folks in to come and be a part of it. And so that way, to kind of address your question, is the legislators are busy. They had a lot going on. And so we knew that if we had that event somewhere else in the state or in the community, it may have been harder for them to get to that event. So we took the event to them and we took the people to them. And so we hosted the event in the state capitol, and legislators were able to come in throughout the day to pop in to hear about the data. We co-presented the data with young folks who were part of the community advisory group. So they were able to hear the data directly from us, but they were also able to hear directly from the youth themselves about their experiences. And so it was really cool. We had a couple legislators who snuck out of session to come and actually listen to the data and hear the results. And so to see folks to be able to come do that, so that's just another way of thinking about, if they can't come to you, how can you then take this to them?
Yeah.
Other from Roger, Josh, anything you wanted to add to that question about like how do you get it in the hands of the people who need it when it's hard?
I want to acknowledge, sorry again, for first name Brianna's comment in the Q&A, in engaging with youth serving intermediaries, to Brianna's point, not only ways in which they support and resource the learning pathways that you take, but also a lot of those intermediaries are also involved in advocating at, in different types of policy or practice arenas, and have voices or have the ears of folks that are engaged in, policymakers, or sorry, engaged with folks who make policy or make practice decisions. And I think another one is how do we also, communicate it in a way that is just beyond the typical, again, I'm an academic research behind the typical paywall sort of ways of which research is done, right? So the value of an op-ed, the value of a public report or brief policy, the value of social media and leveraging social media. Public health gives some great examples as well of using campaigns, and what does a campaign look like to deliver a message, right? And then also determining who and what we mean by policymakers and those that are making that policy. Again, we talking big P, we talking little p, and then I think there's value, because I study partnerships in coalition building, other folks that are also engaged and interested and passionate about the work and the research that has been done that can help advance and advocate moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you. So with our last question, if you two could share just one piece of advice based on your experience, what steps should researchers and organizations take to ensure that their work has a meaningful impact on policy, practice, and the broader community when addressing youth needs and youth voice?
And we're down to our last 2 minutes, not too much
Yes.
pressure. So feel free to share this as your final thought. And if you want to scrap this and you don't want to share this, you want to share some other final thought, we welcome you there too.
Well, I'll share just one piece. It's hard to do just one piece, but the one piece that I have seen happen too often is that we cannot, if we're going to involve young people, it can't be perceived as token. You cannot put 2 young people in a room of 50 adults and say you have youth voice. You've got to make sure that there is some kind of balance in terms of representation. So I think that's a key. Is otherwise, it's perceived as being token. That's my gem.
And don't make them the lunchtime speaking presentation while everyone's eating and no one's paying attention, right?
Yeah.
That's another kind of token way of which I've seen it done. I would just add, making sure that the implications are clear and what the takeaway should be, that folks can understand. How do you turn our sometimes jargony words and language and use in ways in which of delivering messages into something that the average, or what I like to say in my classes, Marvin the Martian can understand and can take up. It would be my 2 cents in that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we'll just have our last slide. So thank you again to the panelists. Thank you so much to Josh and to Roger for sharing your lessons learned. We've held a good audience the whole time here, but I'm hearing as our key strategies here are thinking about beginning with the end in mind. Who do we want to inform? How will we do it? Also thinking about how young people will be at the table in that, beyond tokenism, and then knowing that sometimes young people are not at the table, and what does research or work really look like when they are not at the table, and how can we still sort of uphold the best we can about their needs, and knowing that the needs might be diverse. And lastly, thinking about like how do we get the research into the hands of those who can really move it forward, and that can be different audiences. I love the like little p, big P, and thinking about that there are many ways to inform practice and policy. So tune in for future lessons learned and work. We have our upcoming webinar where our team, led by Danielle Gilmore and Don Terrace Cowens, who's here today, will talk a little bit more about youth engagement around community advisory boards and how to do that component of youth youth engagement. We'll also be sharing some resources, so look out in your inbox for the recording as well as the PowerPoint deck from this session, and lots of cool tools and reports that may help to inform your work. Thanks for being here. Take care. Hey, Dante.
Yeah.
Could you send us a separate link right now just to hop on for about 5 minutes? Well,
Okay.
okay, wait, here it goes. For a second, this line was not clearing. We might be close there. Let's give it one more minute.
Okay.
If you're still on, thanks for joining. Hope to see you at the next webinar.
I think the recording is still on too. May want to